I do always love this though because it does feel super professional.
Yeah, yeah.
Welcome, five
It's
minutes.
almost like
Five
me
minutes.
seeing film and I go five,
Yeah.
4, and
Welcome to Friends Let's Discuss, episode 16 with Fabian and Mira.
the 16.
Is it 16? I don't know. I'm just making it up at this stage. I don't even know. Let's go
Uh,
with 16.
I tiled it 15, but it might be 16. So like we how have we already lost track of like the number of episodes? We barely isn't into double digits.
But I feel genuinely, I don't know if other people feel the same way, but I genuinely feel concerned that it's already end of June and it feels like the year has lasted 30 seconds. It just feels that I don't know if because of the 24-hour news cycle or because this maniac Trump is in power who you have to watch every second of the day like a toddler because you don't know if he's going to draw on the walls or he's going to pee on the carpet or you don't know if he's going to, run out the front door or whatever. Like everyone's kind of like, when you're so concentrated, so heightened, the days just merge into one. When it's quiet, nothing much really happens. It's the same at work and everything's ticking along quietly. It almost feels like the days drag on. That's not, unfortunately, what we're experiencing right now.
No, everything's really fast paced at the moment. And I always like not meaning to jump ahead of our schedule too much, but I almost feel like with the World Cup having its games like so late in our time zone, it's like as well, it's like everything's happening and things are happening whilst you're asleep, and so you're still almost semi-conscious that the game's taking place. Like last night, my neighbors, I don't know if they had some sort of England watch party, but obviously the game didn't kick off until 10, and so there were kids playing outside but like playing excited like 7-year-olds like screaming and playing in the back garden at like 10 at night. And obviously with the as hot as it's been, I've had the windows open. What the hell are these kids doing up so late? Like, go to bed, man. I, I don't
My
like it.
niece was up. My niece was staying with us last night, and she was up watching the England game.
Is she?
I'm shattered because I watched the England game, and she was up. She made it through to I think just the first half, and then she was just I forced her to go to bed because she's absolutely exhausted. But yeah, I don't know if anybody watched it. I don't know what you guys think of it, but I just felt love. Like yes, we won, but it was a really disappointing gameplay love yesterday.
I think it's disappointing if you watched that Croatia game and you thought that was like the new like
Yes.
standard England were going to perform to.
Yeah.
But anyone that's followed England over, the past few decades knows that this is pretty par for the course of any England team. Just a lot of stars, a lot of names that are really recognizable, and a lot of like talent, but just I don't know. I feel like
They just don't play together. I don't know what it is.
but I think it's also the thing, like, this is me cutting some of them some credit, is that you've come off the back of a really long Premier League season or, whatever league you're playing in, and then you go straight into this World Cup and you've traveled all these miles, you're playing in like tough conditions, even like when you watch a Premier League game, most Premier League games are not that interesting. Like if you sit down and watch 90 minutes of most Premier League games, it's like, well, it's tough to get through often. So I think the expectation is that it's going to be like, Brazilian samba, exciting football from start to finish, flicks, volleys, overhead kicks, and like just a goal fest. When in reality, like football is a low scoring game. Like 2-0 is a good scoreline by most measures. So
It
I think we kind of have to reset our expectations a little bit and take the win. Like not conceding and scoring 2 goals is a really good result.
is good of it. I think for me, it's just more because yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we're not Americans. We don't need like 10 goals or whatever, like 100 draws or whatever. But I think the thing for me is I think it was just the passing that was really disappointing. Because the problem is the Panama, although I think they defended so well yesterday, right? Like I think they did really well. I think Panama aren't a really strong team. So I think for me, it's more going forward. These kind of mistakes you can kind of get away with when you're playing against a Panama. But when you start to play against the better teams, like I think France have been playing really well, apparently, Spain, obviously, blah, blah, blah. That's when I get concerned because I feel like this wasn't a World Cup final winning squad in terms of how they played the last two games. They got so frustrated at the second game because they just could, until Rashford came on, they couldn't really even get behind the defensive line. And then yesterday, there was just a lot of passing back
Yeah.
constantly. Like they just didn't want. Saka was the only one. Saka and Rashford, the only ones who were running into players, and Saka was getting shut down by like three or four defensive players. And at that point, he was like, "Okay, I can't do any more than this. Like, I give up. Like, I'm being shut down." And I feel that's the only thing that disappointed me. I think a bit with it because, and like parts of the midfield, they were a little bit all over the place. And then the defense, they were a little bit too slow. So then by the time these guys ran down, they were almost like resorting to just like yanking them back, basically, because they were like, oh my God, they got away from me. You know, like stuff like that. If it was a better team, we would have been crushed yesterday.
I do think it's interesting because I think a lot of the teams have been like underwhelming. Like obviously Spain, I think was it they drew their game against Cape
Yes,
Verde,
yeah.
and then Germany had like a tricky result. Portugal have been stuttering a bit. They've like gone a bit up and down. So I think a lot of the big teams have sort of, I guess, underwhelmed and had like tricky games where you wouldn't expect them to. I do have to confess, I have not stayed up to watch any of these games because I don't know. I got to bed early, man, and I don't like I as much as I enjoy football, I don't need to see this stage of the competition, especially when like in a lot of the groups, three teams can go through out of the four in the group. So it's like there's not enough jeopardy for me to feel like it's worth watching. And England had already qualified for this game as well, so I think a lot of the players were also conscious that it's not worth risking an injury because the game doesn't actually mean anything. So
It's a bit weird. That's new though, surely. Three in
yeah,
the group. Like,
exactly.
it's a bit
It's
weird.
new. Essentially what they've done, and this is my gripe, I guess, is that FIFA, led by Infantino, Gianni Infantino, have sort of said we've seen it as an opportunity to extend the tournament, which means that there's more opportunities for them to bring in advertisers and more revenue. So you wouldn't normally have teams like Cape Verde, you wouldn't normally have teams like Panama, and it's one of those things where actually it's been great to have those teams. But the reason for having those teams feels wrong. So I don't know how you swallow that, how you reconcile that. It's a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, I was just thinking of like as I'm watching it as well. I don't know if you guys saw this week, but in the state of Texas, protesters who were outside an ICE facility were given 100 years, 100 years of imprisonment for protesting an ICE facility. And to put it in context, the governor of Texas, I think it was a governor, he pardoned a sex offender who'd abused his own child and he got 6 months in prison. So America is becoming, well, it's not the America that we've all known and loved, and it's a joke at the moment. Like it's being run by a fascist dictatorship, and because the change is happening inch by inch, slowly by slowly, unless people are paying attention, they're thinking we're over exaggerating. But respectfully, you're not paying attention, and the fact that so many people just completely ignored that, like this is a government, particularly the government that's currently in place, that has funded a genocide, and you all were all there like waving your flags and blah blah blah. So even as I watch my games, because I love my country, so I'm like swallowing it to watch it. I'm struck by how apathetic we've all become to just excusing so many things and so much bad behavior and not taking a moralistic stand really seemingly anymore. Like your missus, she sent me an article about Gail's Bakery because she loves me and she was really reluctant to send it to me, but I forced her to because I saw it in her eye. I was like, I know there's something that you want to tell me that I don't know. And she's like, I don't want to ruin it for you. I was like, no, send it to me, send it to me. And I read it and I was like, damn it, I love that damn sourdough bread. And now I can't buy the sourdough bread anymore. But it's just, and it seems silly, but we've seen that boycotts work because Barclays had to divest from arms manufacturers because of so much pressure that protesters applied. I mean, whether they've changed or not, who knows? You can't trust corporations. But anyway, so yeah, so I'm a little bit mixed torn as well, love, because again, to your point, I absolutely cannot stand FIFA president who is an out and out scumbag. And I hate the hydration breaks with the passion of a thousand suns. I hate 3 out of 4 in the group going through. It's just nonsensical. The time, you know, that Trump is presenting so the fascist dictator funding a genocide, starting wars willy-nilly, killing school children, is now presenting the final trophy to the winning team. You know he's not going to present it. He's just going to hold on to it to himself, and then these guys are going to have to be like leaning in to take a picture with it. So like, The whole thing is just it's a very hard World Cup to watch. I think we've spoken before that I love football, but I feel that as usual, much like the rest of the world, the greed of capitalism and corruption has ruined this beautiful game.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I think that's a struggle as well because the capitalism part of it is I always get surprised at how expensive it is just to buy a top. And so like we were my wife and I we were at like a parent's like social and spoke to one of the dads and he said he had bought a shirt for his dad and himself. The shirt for an England shirt, 85 quid. Like how like we're really being fleeced for a lot of football, and yeah, I I'm at the point where I'm like, I just need to exit myself out of this because maybe there's another sport I can become passionate about that doesn't require me to like spend so much money and to send advertising dollars to corrupt individuals. So
Especially because, love, you know that all they're doing is just sewing on that t-shirt by paying some kid in Bangladesh like £1.99 and then trying to charge us like 85 quid for it. I mean, it's
exactly,
just, I mean, the
exactly.
only thing I would say though, because we were talking about this earlier, is like on social media, it's been quite entertaining on the sort of positive side of the World Cup. So in previous World Cups, of course, it's been significantly marred by violence. So no matter where you go, obviously fights break out. There's a lot of drunk people and craziness. And I think the one 8 years ago, where I forget where it was, but anyway, that wasn't great. But anyway, so there hasn't been as much of that reported this time, but there has been the opposite. So a lot more sort of friendliness and kind of kindness, I suppose, in a certain way. The Americans have been a lot more welcoming than people expected, given the state of their god awful government, which has been a really lovely thing to see. And one of the things that's making the rounds, obviously, on social media is Kansas City, this town in Kansas City that have been hosting the Algerian football team. Now, bearing in mind that I think the stat is still that only 30% of Americans own passports, in some strange way, importing the world might hopefully be a really good thing for the Americans to realize.
You reckon it would change their view on immigration? Well, actually, these people from other
Just
parts of the world aren't that
humanity.
bad.
Honestly, that was just humanity. Like, oh, they're from Africa, North Africa. Oh, Africa's not all bad and dangerous. Like, they're actually some really cool people, and they've really taken on board by the looks of it. They had the library hosting like information sessions on Algeria and what it was, and cultural sessions so people could understand the culture of Algeria. And to be fair, I feel like this town in Kansas City probably knows more than I do about Algeria. So huge credit to them. But in some ways, it's kind of it was nice to see. And obviously, there was an article yesterday in the Guardian about what everyone's calling the Mamdani effect. Who's obviously a very very proud football supporter. He's like you, my friend. He's an Arsenal supporter, so he's been riding on a high between the Arsenal and win and the Premier League, and obviously the Knicks as well. And yeah, as a die-hard football fan, he's actually made it more accessible to New Yorkers and more New Yorkers because he's reduced the cost of transport. He managed to get New Yorkers heavily discounted football tickets as well for the World Cup. So there's apparently a very collegiate feel, which kind of reminds me a bit of London 2012. We know when the Olympics, that was a beautiful time.
Game changer. Like I remember that, and like it
God.
felt like everyone in London was friends with everyone. And it's like you never normally get that in London.
Oh, it was beautiful. Honestly, I still remember it as one of the best times of my life. I remember that whole period. We were all out nearly every single night, weren't we? It was
It
like
was great. It was great.
amazing.
And so yeah, I'm so happy that I think a lot of people went into it thinking that it was going to be just ice raids and people being dragged to detention centers, dragged out of stadiums, stuff like that. So far, that hasn't happened, which is fantastic. So yeah, look, if you're out there and you're enjoying it, then I guess you have every right to see past all of the sort of corruption that I have struggled to see past. I also had this weird thing of like, I look at Cape Verde and I'm like, wow, like everyone in Cape Verde, all the fans are just beautiful. Like, they got the most good-looking fan base in the world. Did they only send the good-looking people so that they can boost their tourism industry? And just have all these guys being like, we're going there next holiday. Like, and just blocking people that weren't attractive. Like, no, you can't go to the stadium. You stay right here. Stay inside.
And Fabian's like, for our next friends holiday, I propose we go to Cape Verde. And it's funny because all the women, well, a lot of the women on social media are kind of talking about the good looking Iranian football team.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then the Nigerian goalkeeper that seems to be making the rounds, even though Nigeria's not in the World Cup, which probably just shows he's absolutely stunning, to be fair. So, I can't, yeah, exactly. Just like, they're just trolling you. They're trolling us right now, to be fair. And there's a lot of funny posts on social media where just like, so my husband tells me that I don't know anything about football. Here's a football, picture of a football. This is the Nigerian goalkeeper. This is the goal post. This is the Nigerian goalkeeper. So yeah, you gotta get your thrills where you can, I guess. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, we wanted to talk about something positive, I guess. I think we would be remiss because Fabian and I were talking about like how to mention this, how to mention this. But essentially, if you guys have been watching the news this week, you would have seen that the United Nations have published a report on the fact that Israel is committing a genocide against the children of Palestine. Now, if you have been following the coverage, you would know that the content is extremely triggering and very, very upsetting. So I think possibly for Fabian and my sanity, we won't be really digging too much into it. I would say though that if you are like us and you're listening to this podcast because we wanted to find a community of people that were tired of being gaslit, this is a peak example of for being gaslit for 2 years, where the rest of us were kind of like, this is happening, this is wrong, children are being starved, children are being sniped in the head, we've seen the evidence. The very few journalists on the ground that are Palestinian have been talking about it. The doctors that came back have been talking about it. And everyone was like, no, you're anti-Semitic, you hate Israel, you hate all Jewish people, you hate da, da, da. And now it's a bit like, well, I mean, like you're sort of telling us what we already knew. So it's a little bit confronting, to be honest, love, because I saw that and I was just like, yes.
Yeah.
And
And I think the and part is the troubling part. It's like, so what are you going to do about it? Like, where do we go from here? Because we've already identified what it is. Like, an identification alone doesn't solve anything, doesn't change anything, because they've already been acting with complete impunity. They don't care what we think at this point. Like, they're going to do what they're going to do, and the total disregard for the lives of the Palestinians. So it's totally meaningless. Is horrific on levels I've not seen in my lifetime, like genuinely. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know where we go from here. I don't know who the global law enforcement is. It doesn't seem
it's
to
not the
be
UN.
UN.
No.
So I don't know what, like, I think that's the part I really struggle with. It's like, so what? Like we already know. What are we going to do about it?
And we carry the pain of it, love. So again, as human beings that have studied massacres, genocides, holocausts, that as young people that had to watch like the famines that occurred in places like Rwanda, to hear about it even at a young age about Milosevic and Bosnia and etc., to then have to now be as well educated and hopefully, empathetic human beings and be gaslit constantly and see nothing happening to the point where there is so little happening that Israeli settlers were hosting an event in London a couple of weeks ago to sell off illegally occupied land in the West Bank, and nothing happened. Nothing was done, even though a number of MPs had called for it. Again, nothing is being done. The United Nations backed Board of Peace, which is, I was shocked because I didn't realize the UN had actually backed this utter nonsense. A journalistic investigation by The Guardian and others over the last 24 hours has seen that, they can essentially, they've put in all kinds of measures in place to protect themselves from any kind of justice, or they have complete impunity essentially to do whatever they want, including taking lands in Palestine with no recompense or no kind of legal stoppage, I suppose, just because they're public lands. I'm not really sure what qualifies as public lands now, when the whole place has pretty much been leveled. But so then you just start to really question, as Fabian said, what even is the point? What is the point of all of this? So that in 50 years' time, you can look back and say, oh, if only we had done something. I can't believe that we didn't do anything. That's just not going to fly. That's not going to fly. That's not going to stand. So please, if you're really thinking that, then you really don't understand. You really think so little of the human race and the electorate. And perhaps that's really what is being reflected back at us, to be
Yeah.
fair. So,
One of the things I saw, and it was just an interesting, I guess, philosophical thought experiment of if someone punches you in the face for 10 days straight and on the 11th day they stop, you thank them. And I think the converse was if someone feeds you for 10 days straight and then on the 11th day they stop, you're angry with them. And I think that's kind of how politics is treating us at the moment, where it's like they don't see the value in looking after the electorate. And so they just, sell off, utilities, run up huge debts. There's corruption taking place on every level, whether it's, at war or in business or just in public services. And at some point, when it comes round to them saying, okay, we're going to give you relief on your taxes, for example, we're like, oh, this is amazing. Like these crumbs you're giving us are so tasty. And I think that's kind of where we are at the moment. And I think the converse of that is probably what's happening in Albania, where, despite I think the land has been given back to the people, despite right after all these years of protests, all these weeks of protests, they are still protesting and they're like, no, that's not enough. Like as prime minister, for even suggesting allowing this to happen, you need to
100%,
give up.
100%.
And so that, continue to protest and say like, we're not going to allow you to treat us in that way. Like you serve us, and when we're not happy with the level of service. So again, if you're looking for how to behave in a democracy, Albania are probably giving you the best example at the moment.
Yeah, I was messaging Fabian this week because I was really thinking a lot about sort of British sovereignty because I just don't know that it really exists, stuff. That we have a facade of it because you want to stamp your passport and you want to take the EU label off of it. But the reality is we've now got who potentially could be our future prime minister getting paid £5 million by a foreign billionaire who works in a pretty shady industry as well that's now being pushed by this person. We've got foreign investors buying up all of the assets. We've got private equity firms buying up care homes and like children's facilities and stripping them dry to the bone effectively and then selling them back off again once they've taken their pound of flesh. We've got foreign governments that are essentially buying influence in our elections. So as much as the Americans talk about the influence of APAC, we pretty much have the same thing, which I never realized except for the last few weeks. There's been some great reporting by Declassified and Canary on the influence of the Israeli lobby also within British politics, which is instantly trying to make a bit more sense as to the passive reaction of our government. The corporate billionaires and donors that are influencing political parties through their donations. So again, there is really no sovereignty because everybody seems to be bought and paid for, and the only people who actually aren't represented are the electorate, the ones who are actually paying the taxes to be able to keep this country running and alive. That is a quite sad, sorry state of affairs. And then you've got this future prime minister who has got £5 million from foreign donors that he can, quote, spend on Ferraris if he wishes, talking about establishment politics, sitting beside the Richard Tice, who's a multi-millionaire tax dodger, and Conservative MPs that have defected from the Conservative Party, all claiming to be anti-establishment and recognising your rights. And there's zero irony, instantly, in the way that they say that. It's
And also all of this on the 10-year anniversary of us Brexit the EU, and so much coverage looking at how productivity and the economy, the British economy as a whole, has lost out anywhere between 5 and 8% of productivity. And so, it's one of those things where this is the guy who really championed Brexit and said, you're going to feel better, you're going to be happier, you're going to
gonna
have
make
your
money.
country back, you're going to be wealthier. None of which is true. Yet somehow he's still one of the prime candidates to be prime minister. And then, on the other side, we've got Andy Burnham, who, as you said, seems to be backed by Israeli lobbying groups. And it's just like, how is this what we're being offered as British electorate? Like, why, what went so wrong? What went so badly wrong?
I think it's capitalism, though, love. I think at the end of the day, if all of us take a genuine step back, unchecked capitalism is the reason we are all in the mess that we're in. And governments are beholden to corporate donors, lobbyists, and corporations. So corporations will threaten you. So if you, I think JP Morgan was the same. If Angela Rayner or Andy Burnham come in and if they change the banking bonuses or some nonsense, then JP Morgan have threatened to pull out of the country. The increase in minimum wage and corporations like M&S and Sainsbury's have threatened, have cut youth jobs, and therefore youth unemployment is increasing. And so their greed is the central reason for the problems that we're facing in this country. But the way that it's constantly spun in, we want to give young people a living wage, and consequently corporations are like, oh, too expensive for us, so we're just going to have to bow out now. No. You're still making a ton of profit, said the M&S boss, who's like made 1.3 billion last year, and was like, oh, we really just cannot afford, with these rising costs of national insurance and the minimum wage. Sorry, are you having a laugh right now? Like, and I think this is the bit that just drives me crazy on all of this stuff, because you're like, if you're not, you need to pay attention, people. Like, look beyond the headlines and really think critically about this, because at the end of the day, all of this is rooted in this system of just greed and exploitation. And until we're prepared to stand up and say, no, nothing's going to change, as we always say every episode.
I think one of the, I guess, pernicious things that happens is the middle class continues to get squeezed. And look, I'm not the one that's going to be like the poor middle classes, but the reason why we need to consider how dangerous it is to continually squeeze the middle class is because it means that there's less buying power. And so rather than saying, okay, look, I'm not going to go to this supermarket chain, I'm going to go to the grocer down the road who's independent and pay a little bit more, but I know that it's not going to a greedy corporation. When you squeeze the middle class, that doesn't happen, right? Like you do go to Sainsbury's, and in fact, you start looking at like grocers that are even less expensive, whether it be Aldi's, Lidl's, whoever else it is, and suddenly it's like we're forced to do what the monopolies want us to do. Because at the moment, between Sainsbury's and Tesco's, they kind of have a monopoly in sort of middle class grocery, and so their prices are kind of locked in step with each other. And it's the same as you go across, all different organizations. There's not enough diversity of companies for you to actually have much choice, especially when it comes to price. And so it 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 maintains power in the hands of these groups. And one of the other things that I sort of became aware of is that actually it means you end up going to places like, take some holidays, for example, you end up going to places where rather than saying this is a place I want to go because it is morally the best place for me to stay, you go to places where, look, the weather's good, the food's cheap, and the staff are really appreciative of us being there. But what that leads to is Trump saying, let's just level Gaza and build hotels because the weather's great here. It could be beautiful. We can make some beautiful resorts. And eventually people will forget that actually this land belonged to the Palestinians. This was where the homes of Palestinian people were. And they'll just be like, oh, it's a great holiday resort, And that will happen. Like, I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but in 10 years' time, given we have such poor memories, like, it wouldn't surprise me if people go there and say, you know what, I went, it was good value, it was cheap, like everybody was really nice, it was all new, it was sparkling clean, it was lovely. And I can really see that happening because actually the middle classes are constantly being squeezed. So you don't have the privilege of saying, no, I'm going to spend my money somewhere that's a little bit more expensive, but they do the right thing. They have a good conscience.
Yeah, I was saying to Fabian, like, if any of my friends want to get rid of me in their life, the easiest way to do that would be to holiday in Palestine in the future. Because if anybody that I know or love does that, then you are literally dead to me. Because if you honestly have such a short-term memory to be going and staying on a resort built on the buried bodies of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and children, including children, then seriously, there's something seriously wrong with you. But I guess, and if you're going to come at us and say, listen, at the end of the day, this has happened lots of places, like the genocide of the Native Americans and the Aborigines and other places, as we all know, this has happened, then I'll say, yes, I completely understand where you're coming from, but I wasn't alive during that time. I am alive during this time. I have watched this happen and unfold in real time. And I will never forgive that ever. But I take your point, Fabian, and you are spot on as usual. And I think the other thing I would say as well to the middle classes is I do find there's a strange contradiction, again, because they're always having these nonsense idiots and complete opposite ends of the spectrum talking absolute bollocks. But, the thing is, you have the same people that are defending trillionaires and billionaires and multimillionaires, then criticizing Bob, who's a finance director earning 150k a year and saying I'm getting really squeezed, like it's not enough to live in London 150k. Or what do you mean, what's wrong with you, you're so greedy. Guys, if you want the capitalist system, the whole point of capitalism is that there is an aspiration. So people continue to buy into the system that if you work hard, there's a meritocracy, you get rewarded, you can buy more crap. That's what capitalism, commercialism is. But if you get to the stage where even in the middle classes, when you're earning a ridiculously high salary relative to the rest of the population, you still don't feel, or you're not able to have a lifestyle that you were promised. I.e., you now have to choose, do I like child A better than child B? Because I may be able to afford to send one kid to private school, but maybe not both kids. Can I buy the nicer car? No, I'm going to have to buy the cheap knockoff that we got from imported maybe from South Korea secondhand or whatever. Like that is not aspiration. And when people are taxed to the hilt because the middle class are paying almost as much disproportionately as the working classes, then they say, what's the point? Why bother? Why would I bother to work this hard and put this much effort in? Much like the young people are saying, why am I bothering with coming out of university with £100,000 of student loan debt when there are no jobs to get into? Why did I waste my time? And then we as a society suffer because we're going to have less educated, less critical thinkers, and more importantly, the experience as well of university. That's such a joyous experience to have because it allows you to grow as an individual as well in a very different way. And for those of us who've been to uni that were blessed to go during a time when maybe we couldn't have afforded it, but it wasn't so expensive, it's a really beautiful thing. So yeah, it doesn't make any sense, love. And the irony, like you were saying this week about closing these tax loopholes supposedly for people that are, because Rachel Reeves has reduced the cash ISA limit because she wants more people under the age of 65 to use stocks and shares ISAs. As you may or may not be aware, stocks and shares ISAs effectively invest money in the stock market or bonds or gilts or whatever. As we know, the stock market rise and fall. So you as an individual now have to take a risk on your savings because she's not allowing you, because the financial services industry are like, look at all this money that's tied up in cash. And yet when the value of those investments fall, ain't nobody gonna help you get that money back. Just FYI.
And it's really scary because obviously, I mean, certainly within the US, the stocks and shares are based on
Rubbish.
these tech companies, which I'm convinced we're in an AI bubble, especially when you look at the SpaceX IPO. The amount of value that has been lost over such a short period of time sort of shows you that nobody really believes that it was valued correctly to begin with. But so many people were forced to buy shares in that business. It's insane that that was allowed to happen. And to your point, it's like Rachel Reeves is now complicit in it, where she's saying, no, this is the sort of thing I want the whole of the UK to be pulled into.
Hmm.
It's a horrible thing. It really is. And again, it's just like I say, the middle classes are being squeezed more and more. And again, poor middle classes. Yeah, but actually, if you don't have a strong middle class, the whole thing collapses.
It does. That's what's been happening over the last 10 years, love. That's the piece. But again, it's saying the quiet part out loud, right? Because Zach Polanski says it in a way that we need a wealth tax on those with significant amount of asset-driven wealth or total wealth or whatever. But what the Conservative government has done prior to this and the Labour government is they've gone after the middle classes. So, for example, if you look at the capital gains tax, the previous allocation used to be, I think it was like £1,000 or £1,500, no, £3,000, sorry, originally. So the first £3,000 of capital gains that you have is tax free, and then the rest of it is then paid at two tapered tax rates. The Conservative government chipped away at that so that the only amount of capital gains that you were allowed was £500 a year that was tax free. Now, if you've got an asset value of £1 million, losing 2,500 of tax-free allowance is not going to make a real bit of difference to your life. If you've got an asset value of £50,000 that you've worked hard over, you put it into stocks and shares and you've taken the risk, that £2,500 is going to make a really big difference. If you have £10,000, it will make a really big difference in tax. If you really wanted to close tax avoidance and tax loopholes, you would go after the tax-free jurisdictions. You would go after this crazy, the way that they set up these corporations to basically avoid paying tax or pay tax in the lowest jurisdiction possible. I think Tax Justice estimated that tax avoidance schemes by corporations resulted, and wealthy individuals resulted in about £300 billion
Oh,
of tax. £300 billion. Like, again, you're complaining because some asylum seekers who are desperate, we're having to pay for the system, and that costs us like 6 billion. You've got £300 billion, people. Like, this is why the rich, like Elon Musk, this is why Elon Musk spent so much money getting Trump elected into power so he could get in under the Doge banner when he wasn't an elected official. He cut all of the funding that supported the poorest around the world. He destroyed the agencies that held corporations to account and protected American consumers, that also were protecting American consumers and workers against him, because there were lots of different federal actions that were taken against him. He buys a social media company, leveraging his huge asset wealth that he paid no tax on, because technically it's an unrealized gain that he managed to get a loan on. He then uses this social media platform to spread extreme amounts of hate and division, causing people in other countries, i.e. ours, to effectively fight each other on the streets of our country, or to set up pogroms, for example, like in Belfast. And all because he wants to now become a trillion, which has so many zeros, I don't even know how to write the number down. And it's just like, I don't even, but I mean, in terms of his return on investment, love, I mean, look what's happened. Oh, and then because of that, the UK government is too scared to just shut down X because it's a cesspit and it is facilitating actual terrorism on our soil. But they're too scared to do it because Elon Musk owns Trump and the US government, so we don't know what then Trump will retaliate with. Case in point, this week, Trump is now threatening 100% tariffs on Europe if they put the Digital Services Act in. The Digital Services Tax simply says that tech companies, and any company that's worth above a certain amount, it's not just tech companies, any company that generates a certain amount of income above, I think it's like 50 billion or 50 million or something crazy, they just have to pay an extra 2% of tax. They barely pay any tax in the countries, but they extract a significant amount out. But Trump, because he's bought and paid for by all of his tech company donors who've paid for the ballroom, are pushing this.
pay for the ballroom and the reflection pool filled with algae.
Then apparently all it took was somebody in one of the most heavily guarded places in the country to just run a Stanley knife down the middle of it.
Yeah, like just with a scuba diving gear or maybe just a snorkel. Just went in with one standing knife and just said, you know what, this will do it. This will get the job done. Yeah. And if you believe that, like I guess you will literally believe anything.
Believe anything. I think we've seen that for ourselves, though, haven't we, love? Because the MAGA Republicans, they literally believe anything. And I think I was watching clips of this guy. I forget his name now. He was on that stupid Jubilee thing, and he was debating 20 MAGA women, and you're just like, I mean, I hate to use the term stupid,
But
but
sometimes there's nothing better to say. Like,
I don't know what to call you. I mean, and I was saying to Fabian this week, like, what just fascinates me about this whole world that we now live in. There are so many people that just balls out are happy to be stupid as F on national television. Normally, you would be super embarrassed. You'd be like, oh, I don't know. I wouldn't want to go on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire because I don't want to embarrass myself on TV. Now these people make a living out of it.
it's interesting because I feel like maybe in like 1,000 years time, like Trump will be viewed as some sort of like religious leader, some sort of cult leader, and there'll literally be like books about him that people like read and have like rituals around because like the faith that people have in whatever he says must be the truth. Like it's objectively true because he said it. It needs to be studied. It needs to be studied.
But Bruv, studied like after the Second World War, when a lot of psychologists tried to study how could Hitler have convinced so many ordinary day-to-day German people to commit such atrocities, or at least be committed by proxy because they basically did nothing. In the same way, how could so many Americans commit or be sort of enshrined within this crazy cult that decimated everything America has stood for? How did that happen? So to your point, I spot on think that will happen. But the bit that I find confusing is I feel like there was a study done again exactly in the same way after the Second World War. They found that when they did this test, and forgive me, I can't remember the name of it, so if people remember, put it down. But they did this test where they had people come in and they had a manager tell them what to do, and increasingly not good things. They found that people that believed in a higher power wouldn't participate. Here, I don't understand how supposedly Christian nationalists, sorry, are going along with this when you're supposedly supposed to believe in God. I find that a bit confusing. So yeah, I do think that will be studied, but in almost like a slightly different degree of.
I think so. One of the books I started reading was it's the Anatomy of God, the Anatomy of God by Francesca Stavrokopoulou. And so, like, one of the interesting things about it is she talks about how, as Christians, you have two books of the Bible, the Old Testament, New Testament. And in the Old Testament, it says the land of Canaan was the promised land to the chosen people of God. And the chosen people of God got the name Israelites. And the land of Canaan is now where you have sort of, well, now where Israel is, but like it's a much larger area. And so it's almost like if you believe so literally that all of these things happened, you will almost do anything. Whereas, I'm not religious, but I'm interested in theology. And so you sort of take the books of the Bible apart and you kind of sort of recognize that actually all of it is constructed. And, if you believe in this wholeheartedly, then you're going to find offense with what I say next. But all of this is the work of man. All of these books have been put together to produce a narrative. But if you sort of take it as faith and say that this is absolutely the word of God, then you kind of go down a pathway where it's not about being good. It's about following what this narrative says and chasing that with everything you believe in, with all your life, all your passion, and whether or not it's good is going to be determined by God, and your God says that this is okay. So it's a really weird thing, It's like I think we all want to feel like being Christian means that you are good and you turn the other cheek. But if you're Christian and you're only interested in the Old Testament, not the New Testament, because the New Testament is where you have Jesus sacrificing himself and saying, like, I will die for your sins. And if you repent and try and uh, you know, show contrition for the sins you've committed, then you will access the kingdom of heaven. None of that is in the Old Testament. So if you're only interested in the Old Testament, then you will live a very different life. It's a very different type of Christianity. And again, obviously, the Bible as it was written in those times was sort of like the Abrahamic religion. So you have, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and they all like are effectively different branches that come from this sort of core prophet, I guess you would call him, or core individual. And so they all have taken a kind of different approach, and each branch has another branch, and so it's very different. And it's not as simple as, I guess, me certainly would like to sort of view it as all Christians are just kind, peace loving, and will only want the best for mankind. It's not quite the case when you sort of peel back the layers.
And it was funny because I was talking to my mom about this yesterday, lol, because I think the thing for me is, like, I agree with you. So I am religious. I'm Hindu. I've been practicing my whole life. But I recognize myself that systems, particularly systems like patriarchy, have existed for as long as man has been alive on this earth. And therefore, it is impossible to assume that that has been separated from whatever has been written through the guise of religion. So even as a Hindu, the Vedas are the Hindu scriptures. When you hear different interpretations or you read different books about them, utter nonsense. They're just the patriarchy under the guise of religion, right? But what I was saying to my mum was, what I find confusing about what's happening in the world at the moment is that my understanding always of democracy that was that it was secular. So that it had nothing really to do with any religion. It was its own system, essentially, where people were free. You had core tenets like freedom of speech with responsibility, but freedom of speech, you had journalistic integrity, you had free and fair elections, you had politicians that represented you, etc. Right? Now we seem to have this very strange merging of religion and democracy such that it doesn't become democracy anymore. So, for example, even in India, the Hindu nationalist government under Modi is trying to make India a Hindu country. And what Gandhi had fought for, even at the time of independence, was for India to become a secular country, i.e., every religion lives side by side, but you have a core Indian identity, a national identity. In under the Zionist sort of philosophy, then to your point, because the books had written that the land was theirs 2,000 years ago, they feel zero compunction about any action that they take because they believe it's the will of God. So killing, shooting a baby in the head, a newborn baby in the head, just, I mean, it's the word of God, right? So it doesn't really matter. So no issues here. The fact that, again, even in America, you've now got this very strange merging where the Supreme Court now have justices that are leading with a Christian ideology or Christian nationalist ideology rather than a legal framework, which is really what their job and their role is. So then all it just makes me think, love, is are we basically ending up in this stupid ass situation where we're ending up in religious wars again? Everyone's just fighting these weird ass religious wars because somebody thinks that by attacking Iran, then this means that the chosen people or Christ returns or whatever it is or whatever. Like, I feel like in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, you know, the one with Kevin Costner.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
At the beginning, do you remember him and Morgan Freeman? They were both on opposite sides, but they were fighting the Crusades at the time, right? And that was a Christian versus Muslim battle. Like, are we really saying 3,000 years ago we're back here again?
It feels like it.
Oh my.
Like, and I mean, look, obviously America isn't the world, and so I think it's kept. We kind of have to be mindful that the actions America are taking and supporting the actions of the Israeli government is not the actions that Spain is endorsing or other nations. Thankfully, right?
Thankfully.
But yeah, it's basically that dressed in slightly more modern clothing. It's not changed a great deal at all.
And I was debating with Fabian earlier, guys. So the thing is, Fabian and I have been friends for so long, sometimes we forget to hit record. And this is literally just us. I mean, you probably think we're super boring when we meet, but we literally debate stuff like this as well when we get together. But one thing I was trying to understand, so again, you look at the Labour government, or really any government with the exception of the Greens, with the exception of the Spanish government, even Canada have slightly placated Israel again. Europe is doing nothing. America obviously is participating in funding the genocide. And I was thinking to myself, like, I'm just trying to noodle, like, why on earth is this happening? And the only conclusion I could draw, which I'm not saying is the right one, is are they really just this scared of the Muslims? They're like, we need to just have an ally in that region at any cost. And we literally mean any cost. Like, they can compete, Holocaust 2026, and we're going to just stand by and say, nothing to see here, don't worry about it, because we're that scared of the Muslims and the Arabs with all of their money and their oil that this is what we need to do. I don't know. I don't know why otherwise. I don't get it.
I mean, honestly, I can't make sense of this war at all.
I just don't
So
understand.
I think at this point, any idea is worth like considering, because it's not. Normally there's like, okay, there's a bad guy we need to stop, and that's why people go to war. Or it's like, we want to expand our territory, which is kind of like what's happening with Ukraine and Russia, right? Russia, like, this was part of Russia, and we want to take it back, and clearly wrong. But at least you're like, that seems to be why it's happening. There's no obvious reason why this is happening in with between Iran and the US, or I even struggle to accept what's happening with Israel, right? And destroying all the Palestinians there. So yeah, look, I can't push back against any idea because I don't have a better option.
I honestly don't know either, love. But I think I'm just as perplexed as you. So I'm trying to, like, I don't know if other people feel the same way, and you're just like, what on earth is happening here? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. I just don't really get it. I don't understand. I don't understand how we're here. I don't know what the reason is. And I think for me, particularly as you people say, like, why do you care so much? you're English, what does it matter? Well, it matters because, well, putting aside the fact that obviously we're human beings, what this whole issue has exposed is there is what you would imply to be foreign interference in our government. Because then you have to confront the very sad reality that our government isn't really listening to us. Like, and then the question then becomes, well, why do we have a government anyway? What is the point? And is that why? And you can understand why people are so disenfranchised by politics because you've got I guess the Labour Friends of Israel or the Conservative Friends of Israel that own two-thirds of both sides of the political two-party spectrum. Then you've got people being anti-Semitic to the only Jewish politician who's calling out anti-Semitism and genocide. Wild. And then you've got debates being shut down, as reported in the news this week, where we're trying to discuss whether there is, because we don't actually know, to be fair. So that's why we have to investigate these things. Like, is there actually interference here? Like, do we know? I don't know. Like, but that debate was shut down effectively this week because you're not really allowed to ask any questions, where you get Palestinian action protesters who go and destroy a couple of drones in a factory that are being regarded as terrorists, literally, and imprisoned as terrorists, where British pensioners now are being imprisoned because they protested against a genocide. And then you're kind of thinking, but it does affect us though, love. That's why it's so disturbing and your word earlier, pernicious.
Yeah.
It is scary, isn't it? Because then you're just like, what on earth is all of this about?
And that's the thing. I think, it's always fine until it's at your door, and then it's already too late. And so, uh, part of why we want to have the discussions because maybe we can't get ahead of things, but at least let's be aware of what's happening and try to push back before it goes any further, And I feel like that's a big part of what we're trying to do because at some point it could be someone that you care about, and you would say, "I wish I had done something about it. I wish I had stopped." I'm sure, going back to your example, there was plenty of good people in Germany at the time, but like the good people that don't do anything are almost complicit, It's a sad thing. So I don't know. Maybe you could question the degree to which this is actually doing anything, but I still believe something is better than nothing.
I think it's a Desmond Tutu quote to your point. If you're passive in situations of oppression and injustice, then you've chosen the side of the oppressor. I believe that is a quote, not verbatim, but yeah. Anyway, so yeah, we didn't want to labor this one, but I guess that's the only reason why, guys. Because again, we're like Fabian says, we're just trying to noodle this together, and we wonder if you're as confused and perplexed as we are. Because I don't really have any of the answers either. But we obviously, I think it's important to discuss. So I guess in that spirit, love. If we're talking about the lack of seeming, I suppose, influence we really have in our own democracy. So obviously, as you guys may be aware, Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, resigned on Monday. Andy Burnham won an MP seat last week in a local by-election that the gentleman who was already there stood aside for, who then turned out to be the leader of the Friends of Israel group. But anyway, that side. He is now putting together his own parliament. But if you're wondering how that's possible and how that can happen, because in the British system, you vote in the party, you don't vote in the leader. So if the leader changes, it's only the members of that party. So the people who are a member of the Labour Party. So say, for example, if Fabian signed up to become a donor or a member, pardon me, they're the only ones essentially that are allowed to vote. So in which case it's essentially been a foregone conclusion that Starmer's out and Burnham's in.
Yeah.
And similarly, before anybody comes at us, is in the Reform Party, Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick, who were elected as Conservative members of Parliament, then switched and joined the Reform Party without getting the permission of the people of the constituency that voted for them. So, just to be fair. So anyway, so Andy Burnham supposedly is going to be our new Prime Minister. What do we think about that, love?
Yeah, I struggle with Andy Burnham because I feel like, a lot of people say he did a good job in Manchester where he was mayor. I think he's had a few questions about global politics asked of him, and his answers have been sort of less than satisfactory, to say the least. And the whole way in which it's come about just smells really foul. Here's my thing. I think, I don't want to sound like I'm making the defense of Keir Starmer, but one of the things that is sort of leveled at him is how he didn't push to get into Europe quickly enough, which I'm like, okay, well, we had Brexit 10 years ago. it's quite not unanimous, but it was quite clear that a majority of the country, a small majority, but a majority of the country wanted us to be out of the EU. And so what he was doing was seemingly making trade deals with nations outside of Europe. So, had a trade deal with Japan recently, trade deal with Gulf nations, trade deal with India. And to me, it's one of those sort of things where if you were at any point to go back to the EU and say, hey, we want to make a deal, you're going to want to do that with a relatively strong hand because the EU have already said that any nation that comes back to us is going to have to pay some sort of penalty for leaving. So you kind of need to be in a situation where you're like, look, it's in your interest to let us back in as well. It's going to be mutually beneficial. But if you telegraph that's what you're doing, I mean, I'm sure there's people on the side of the EU that are well aware of what was taking shape.
Mm.
But if you telegraph that and say, look, I'm going to make a bunch of deals with other nations before I go back to the EU, then it's never going to be a good negotiation, right? Like it's pretty basic and that wouldn't work out well. And so there's was on one hand this sort of lack of patience in terms of how Keir Starmer delivered things. Now, without question, his communication was terrible. Some of the things he said was like really unforgivable and should not be forgotten. The whole Rivers of Blood speech is like one of those moments where I was like, oh my God, like how is this a Labour Prime Minister saying these things? So to be clear, I'm not a fan of Keir Starmer, but I do think stability in national politics is important. And it did seem like he was doing a lot of the right things. We shared a graph a while ago that showed in each quarter that Keir Starmer had been Prime Minister. Between him and Rachel Reeves, they delivered some amount of growth. So we didn't fall into decline at any point. The UK was one of the strongest economies in the G7. Yet it felt like the British media effectively conspired against him. And I don't understand the rationale for doing that other than it gets clicks, it gets views, it gets shares. It's like we're being ruled by social media metrics at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's a really scary thing because eventually what's happened is that Andy Burnham's come in. It's not going to be long before the British media turn on him. If it hasn't happened already, it's going to be, within a few weeks. And so my worry is that we're going to go through, so many years of instability that we can't make any progress. And, I keep going back to this, whether you like it or not, the progress China has made is because they've had like one leader with a clear vision that plans in 10, 20, and even 50-year cycles, not this sort of, 18 months here, 24 months there, 6 months there. Like that's kind of what we've had. And so we've really been spluttering and stalling along. And I'm, again, with all that we already know about Andy Burnham, I'm not convinced that it's going to be any better. And so it's kind of where I am at the moment. I'm struggling a lot.
Yeah, I can't disagree with any of that, love. I really don't know. I'm not convinced either. I won't. There's literally there's this is also why the algorithm hates Fabian and I because I'm not going to argue with him for the sake of arguing. But I agree with you. I think you're spot on. I think that's a really good reflection. I think the interesting thing with me for China is the Chinese system as well technically was rooted in communism. So despite the fact that obviously they've moved into this kind of quasi-capitalist communist dictatorship, whatever you want to call it, it's a very different economic model. The reality is, despite being in power for so long, the reason that they can continue to be in power is because they do still put the interests of the people at the forefront. So they're thinking long term with the interests of how do we develop our economy, our country, how do we lift people out of poverty. The challenge with our governments, as we have said many times, is that their interests are just with corporations and donors. They don't really give a crap. As long as this rich guy gets an already bigger tax break and he can get funding from the government, which isn't called a benefit, and if the corporations can get to consume and take a lot of resources, including resources from all of us from this country, but not have to pay as much back, everybody's happy, right? Just not us. And that's the thing, isn't it? So I think that's what your wife was messaging us last week about a book called Donut Economics. And again, it's one of those things because I have about 75,000 books, so I always buy faster than I read. But she's so diligent at that. But essentially, the bottom line of Donut Economics is we need to stop thinking in GDP terms because GDP is not a measure that reflects society. So that's the challenge. So it's all well and good to say we have GDP growth of 1% or 2% or whatever, but really what you're saying, if people don't feel it, so if people don't feel it when they go shopping and get their weekly shop or their Nando's, which is like £30 per person right now, with tiny little chicken and thighs or whatever, like if people don't feel it, and as we said, the middle class is squeezed and there's no aspiration and da, 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 da. The GDP growth in the productivity numbers Fabian refers to, which again, he did that chart a few episodes ago, that's all going into the hands of a few individuals and corporations, private equity firms, rich donors that have vast sums of money because they're stripping that wealth belongs to them, not the rest of us. So that's where we end up in this situation. So again, John Major was talking about Brexit, love. He was talking about, 6 to 8% GDP loss. Even if you take 6%, that's 100 billion. I think you should convert that into, so they say like each household has lost £2,000 per year per household. Like that kind of thing is tangible. Do you see what I mean? Like instead of talking in these kind of abstract GDP terms, talk about what it means at an individual level. So that level of GDP means that we've lost 150,000 small businesses, which to Fabian's early point means corporations are now created more monopolized structures, which means in the same period, prices have increased for you when you go to your weekly shop by 25% because there's less people in the mix, kind of thing. So anyway, and oh, by the way, guys, I don't know if you saw this, but I sent it to Fabian, this wild article in the Wall Street Journal about Polymarket, bless you, about Polymarket, which apparently had essentially created this additional website on Polymarket where they paid influencers and individuals to go on and pretend that they'd made these crazy bets and won a lot of money to then be able to convince people that they should then use Polymarket and put crazy bets in place. So like, would Trump say the words April Fools in this week or something equally ridiculous? And apparently that's legal. That is legal in America.
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's nuts as well. I think it's weird because there's been like really dodgy things taking place on Polymarket for a long time that people have been reporting on. So obviously, again, not meaning to go back to it, but with the Iran war, people were sort of betting that certain strikes were going to take place at a certain time, and it seemed like they had inside information that shouldn't be available to the public, and were winning bets on it. But then there were also sort of more, I guess, funny things where there was a weather station or a weather sensor, and someone had made a bet on a certain temperature. And then what they did was they sort of climbed over the fence and put a hairdryer to the sensor. And so you've got all of these things happening where Polymarket is a super like dodgy sort of platform. And then I don't know if you saw this week as well, Mark Zuckerberg had told his developers to make a Polymarket competitor. So they're are using some of their resource to copy Polymarket and make their own version of it. So it feels like this is the sort of thing that is not going to go away. And I guess part of what Polymarket are trying to do is be the place that you go to make these sort of bets, and are willing to pay influencers to say anything to make it that brand. And again, to your point, there doesn't seem to be any legal recourse, and doesn't seem to be anything that protects consumers or the average citizen. Because if you do think you can win all this money, but actually the whole reason you thought that you could win that money was based on a lie, you should have some sort of protection. But I don't know where that is.
yeah, that got stripped away, love. A lot of that got stripped away. Even the fact that the SEC allowed an IPO of this magnitude, SpaceX, to go to IPO and then be immediately listed and be allowed to be traded in this way, that is a violation of what the SEC has historically done. So they've made an exception for Trump's biggest donor.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. Yeah,
Surprise, surprise. And they're saying that because of the way it's been indexed, that a lot of the pension funds are going to end up inexplicitly including SpaceX into their portfolios. So now all of our pension funds that we pay into are now going to be tied to this Ponzi scheme of the world's richest man who bought political influence in America. But anyway, so yeah, it's been an interesting week in terms of consumer protections,
yeah,
to be
yeah.
honest. And they were saying with Brexit, love, apparently there were 5 million people over the age of 70, I think, who voted in the Brexit election, of which now 4 million are no longer with us. So people voted for this action who now no longer don't live with the consequences of it. The young people are paying the price. And I think the Brexit vote was only a couple of million, right? Plus or minus, I think there was only, it was like 40, it's like 51.5% or 52% to 48% or something. So there's only a couple of million votes essentially in the
Right.
decision. But to
Right.
your point, I do agree with you. I don't think it's as simple as criticizing him for not going back, just going back to Europe, because I don't think it's as simple as that when you ask the country at the end of the day to make a decision to leave. I don't agree with it. I think that there are a lot of people that are bitching and moaning about how bad everything is and how expensive everything is and cost of living, and at the same time are like, oh, how dare you go back to Europe? Well, frankly, you can't have your cake and eat it. So you guys need to pick. You can. So I know this is going to be a very unpopular opinion, but you need to grow up and make a choice. Because the fact is, we are all poorer because of Brexit. We are economically unstable. We are geographically unstable because of climate change. We are militarily unstable because we put all of our eggs in the American basket and now America has turned on all of us. We have to find an ally. We are a population of 68 million people on a tiny little island in the ocean. The empire died a long time ago. Live with it, people. I love my country, but I think that as British people, we just need to be a bit more realistic and decide what is it that we want to leave for the young people and for anybody who's been living in this country this week. And I say that deliberately because there are a lot of funders and donors that don't live in this country. It's been swelteringly hot this week. I
Just
mean, ridiculously oppressively hot. And again, before other people come at us, just to be clear, this is England. Okay, this is Great Britain in the northern hemisphere that was always famed for being a cold and rainy country. We do not get 35-degree heat waves in this country for consecutive days, for consecutive weeks.
we're not built for it. Like the homes are not built to be cool in this type of temperature. And so our public transport is also not built to
Yes.
be cool in this sort of temperature. And so I don't it's I would love to see some sort of data on the economic impact of like this sort of temperature, people having to work in this temperature because my daughter's school was saying, hey, if you want to take your child home because it's too hot and not send them to school, that's fine. It's like no, I don't. You take my child. I'm sure you've got bigger fans than we had, and you can try and keep your rooms cool. Like we don't have any air conditioning at home. So, like even going into an office, even getting on the train, that must just feel horrible the entire time. Like your productivity at work would have to go down, right? Like would have to. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people have sort of been climate change deniers more because it's an inconvenient truth, more because it gets in the way of them making money immediately, as opposed to them not feeling and experiencing the change of climate. I don't know like what it's going to take for there to be a mass consensus that we all need to make changes. I did see that people are plug in solar panels at a higher rate, which I guess is a good thing. There was one clip of a guy saying he was in his electric car that had been charged by solar panels because that was the only place where he could get air conditioning. So he just sat in his car with the air conditioning on, and it cost him like 20p to be in there for like
Yeah.
5 hours or however long he was in there. So it's like, okay, fair
I was
enough.
joking about sleeping in the car the other day because I was like, this is just madness, honestly. But it is that, isn't it, love? So you get, again, when I always think about net zero, so net zero is net zero. So it's the idea that the emissions and then essentially I guess what we put in and what we take out essentially net off against each other. But in order for that to be possible, corporations have to make sure that what they build and how they build and the offices that we have are energy conscious or environmentally conscious. But the reason they hate it and why they push it through reform and the conservatives is because it's going to cost them money. It's got nothing to do with not believing that global warming exists or seeing the impact, as Fabian says, because the aircon was out in the office on Thursday. All my colleagues were dying. I happened to be at home that day. It does have a material impact on us as human beings. Now, obviously, if you couple that with, tech billionaires and Peter Thiel's secret societies and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, who believes that water consumption should be preserved for AI and not humanity, maybe they don't really care because they're going to replace us all with AI and robots anyway. But for those of us who care about humanity, we cannot live like this. We cannot live like this. And it's hard for us now in 2026, love. What is it going to be like in 20 years for the kids?
Hey, look. I'm glad I was able to pass on some melanin to my child because I'm like, you're gonna need as much as as you've got and maybe more because there was a clip of one, I think he must have been a comedian, but he was saying, look, all of these uh, all of these white people saying we need to get out of the country. It's like in the temperature stays like this in a few more years, you're gonna be black as well. So you're gonna be one of us.
Yeah, but that was always the funny thing that always made me. I always find it ironic, love. Like the reddest red guy who is sitting in Dubai complaining about like brown people in his country, i.e., England, or people who go and put so much fake tan on they're not that far off my skin color, but are also racist to people of color. I mean, it's never really made a huge amount of sense, has it? So.
No, yeah, you gotta make sense of the nonsensical, can you? Like, yeah, come on, guys.
Sometimes it's hard, isn't it? Although it was really funny because one of our friends sent a clip of this lady who has posted a funny thing about the heat. So essentially, she's working from home and she's like dripping with sweat. All her makeup is running down her face and talking to her colleague who's purportedly at the office, thankfully not camera on, and having to pretend that everything's fine because actually the rest of us are sitting in the hottest room in our houses. Because the trade-off in London, anyway, in particular, is as Fabian said earlier, the trade-off is sitting and sweltering in your home in London with the fan literally directly on you blowing warm air, or having to traverse unconditioned and packed public transport to get to an air-conditioned office. So there's no good scenario in this, essentially. So yeah. But anyway, so I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to cover, love.
One thing we kind of, I don't know, we don't need to cover this so we can get edits this out, but we were talking about how Ford was having to rehire engineers because they had laid off a bunch for AI and realized that actually AI couldn't do the work. And so, yeah, we were just laughing. Like humans are still really important. And so when you get rid of them, actually, you maybe consider exactly what it is they do because some of it, like, we know as much as anyone who works in any sort of office that a lot of what's on the job description is only a small part of the job you do on a day-to-day basis. And there's lots that isn't covered. So when you say, hey, I'm sure AI can do this job description, well, there's a bunch that isn't on this job description that AI has not aware of, can't do, hasn't been trained to do. You still need humans, guys.
100%. And for the, I always remember because obviously we're in tech, so we get that Microsoft guy who's running AI at Microsoft, and the clip is like, oh, within all productivity tasks will be replaced within 12 months. I can confidently say, as someone who is a Microsoft power user, every day I have to restart Excel 3 times because it crashes. So if you cannot fix software that you guys have freaking been working on for 45 years, you're out your damn mind if you think that you can replace humans in a year with Copilot, which is insanely so. So let's be a bit realistic, people, okay?
I thought so I'd been using Apple for ages, Apple Mac, and then
Yeah.
I was using like Google Drive, so all my spreadsheets were on like Google Docs, and then I changed job, and at one point I was having to use like Excel, and it kept crashing. I was like, how the hell is it still like this? Like, what? This is one of the most wealthy, biggest companies in the world. Why is it crashing?
Because they got
It's
a
like
monopoly. That's
this.
why.
There you go.
They got monopolies. They've got all of us hostage in this pile of crap that we all have to endlessly pay for and use. And this is the funny thing, because there's someone who's come off of using a Mac for the first time because of the company that I worked in. First 3 months, absolute nightmare because nothing was where it was supposed to be and all my shortcuts didn't work. But with a Mac, you don't have this insane startup time. It doesn't crash on you 3 times a day. It's not super buggy. The command key, which is super important, is right next to where the shortcuts are. I'm genuinely worried I'm going to get RSI on this Windows PC because the command key is so far away that any shortcut, I'm like this, basically. And then the trackpad is so clunky and lumpy, I have to put so much pressure. Whereas with a Mac, it's just light touch, feather tap. So I complain every day to my colleagues, and the biggest concern challenge they have is it's not as good. I'm like, have you ever used it? No. The biggest problem is change, employees changing because they're too scared to change because that's human beings. We don't like to change. But the bit that people forget is that whilst the Mac is newer and Mac OS is not the founding software that everybody uses, the reason it is better because it's because of that. Because it's seen the mistakes that Windows have repeatedly made and the mistakes that Dell and the other hardware providers have made, and it's fixed those. So, yes, you have an uncomfortable period at the beginning. I know it sounds like I'm selling Apple here, but I'm genuinely doing it because every day I was literally I was been at this new company for 3 weeks and I was on my third laptop.
It's insane.
Third laptop, right?
How it's so insane that like they managed to get away with it. Do you know what I mean? Like what like you've got all these corporations paying so much for the crappy hardware, crappy software, but they're just like locked into it. It's so insane.
It's shocking. It's shocking. And I saw there was a lawsuit actually the other day. We'd have to dig in. I'd implore you guys just dig in if you hear about it. But apparently iCloud, if you're an iCloud user, they were being sued because Apple forces you to pay to use iCloud, but then you also have to pay for iCloud. So then there was some kind of lawsuit around that as well.
Yeah, I'm having issues with that because I'm like I. This is kind of getting outside of the podcast, so we'll try and wrap up. But I use the Mac Mini, and so like you say, it automatically saves all your content to the iCloud. And then I was getting his email saying your iCloud is full.
In a
I'm
minute.
like, I don't even use iCloud. How can it be full? And it's like if you want to upgrade your storage, pay us this much money. And I'm like, no, like I don't. What are you doing? Yeah,
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But this is it, isn't it? And I think that's the thing about that book, Techno Feudalism by Yanis Varoufakis. I think that's his point because they're all basically holding us hostage, aren't they? So yeah, this is going to be interesting. But anyway, listen, guys, I think we've had quite a long one. We apologize for being off last week. It was entirely my fault.
not
But
entirely
yeah,
off.
I had a. But again, in the exploitative working class, essentially, this is how I work at my desk. And because I work quite long hours, essentially by the time I get to the weekends, my shoulders are up by my ears. I don't know if you guys feel the same thing. And then I get really bad migraines. So unfortunately, we had to sacrifice the podcast last week. But yeah, it's been really good talking to you, my love. Oh, by the way, one thing I wanted to add. I'm sorry, we completely forgot to add it at the beginning of the podcast. We're so bad at this, aren't we? This is how we know we're not influencers, love. So anyway, Fabian and I, we did meet last weekend because we are actually friends outside of this, first and foremost. So anyway, we were celebrating Fab's birthday and we went to Adoh exclamation mark in Covent Garden. And I personally feel, love, because I've obviously eaten a lot of Sri Lankan food over my lifetime, I thought it was really good.
It was delicious.
Delicious. So what did you think?
Literally, like I could order each and every item on the menu, happily eat everything every day. I mean, look, I'm biased because I love that style of flavors and cooking where it's like a symphony of spices all coming together and like just everything is like just buzzing and happy and just I love that. Do you know what I mean? That's what gets me excited.
Yeah.
So they did a really great job. Yeah, I've
Yeah, highly
mind it
recommend,
to say
right, love? Yeah,
yeah.
highly recommend. Delicious food, and I loved it as well because I am again. Come after me, I'm a coconut, but I can't do spicy food. It's fine. I can't do spicy food, and actually, Sri Lankan food is authentic Sri Lankan food is extremely spicy. But what these guys managed to do, which I found really impressive, is not sacrifice the complexity of the flavors for pure heat. And I think that's a really difficult thing to achieve. They managed to do it beautifully, and the service was great. The venue is so pretty. So yeah, we don't normally, I think we've only ever done one restaurant recommendation, but I have to say, like, I think for me personally, this was absolutely brilliant.
My one tip is to let the mutton roll cool down. Like I bit into it too eagerly. That shit came out hot. The roof of my mouth felt different for a while. I tried to hold it in. I did out the floor. Like I tried to just because I was out in public, I didn't want to spit it out straight away.
You're like,
And I hold it and I'm like, maybe I cool it down and just when you try and blow in it whilst it's in your mouth, you go, nah, I should have just let that out straight away. But yeah, it comes out hot.
I knew it was hot when you resorted to eating with a knife and fork.
I was like, nah, I can't. Like, and I didn't have the patience to let it cool down either. So I was like, no.
Too delicious. I have to go. Okay. But yeah, and I have to say, guys, so like we don't have time for this in the podcast today, but I have to say, like, we are slightly biased because we're Londoners. But this is one of the most beautiful things that we're so blessed to be able to live in London because we have such a huge variety of cuisines because we have a number of people that ancestrally have come from different places and they have brought us the joy of their food. So I always used to say there was a market behind in central London where I we used to work, you could get Israeli falafel wraps, Lebanese falafel wraps. Like we go down to that level of granularity because we are so blessed to have diversity in this city. We have a great mayor, and maybe Fabian and I can talk about the development fund that the City of London have actually set up. So they're going to build their own housing development in London to create more social housing, which I think is a great idea. But yeah, so for all of those people that are shitting on London, sorry,
You're
mate, but you don't live here.
yeah, you're wrong. It's a beautiful city. I wouldn't. I mean, look, it's gonna sound narrow-minded, but I couldn't see myself living anywhere else in the world. So yeah, I
I
love London.
tried. I did try, love. I love to travel.
Did try, yeah,
I did try. I just couldn't do it. I mean, in Silicon Valley, stuff closes at like 9 p.m. and I was like, eh? I was like, what the hell's going on? Like, I want to go out for dinner now. They're like, no, sorry, can't do it. So yeah, we travel a lot, but
you can't go out for dinner at 9 o'clock in Silicon Valley.
no, everything closes.
That's insane.
9 o'clock, yeah, it's wild, dude. Even in San Francisco as well, which is like the city,
Yeah,
everything closes at like 9 o'clock. There was only a few places that were open, but they were bars for the young people.
yeah,
But yeah, it was wild. But anyway, yeah, so I've traveled a lot I've been very blessed to travel a lot because it's a huge passion and everywhere I go, although we've met amazing people and beautiful places, London's still number one,
100%.
100%. So let's end it there. Listen, friends, we'll see you on the next podcast and thank you so much for listening.
Until next week. See you guys. Bye.
Bye.